Under the pale buzz of the fluorescent lights, the air inside the store felt unnaturally still, heavy with that mix of cheap detergent and stale coffee that always clung to small roadside shops. Michael B. Jordan stepped inside, pulling down the hood of his gray sweatshirt, his reflection flickering briefly in the glass door as it swung shut behind him. He had been on his way back from a late training session, sweat still clinging to his skin, when he decided to stop here for a bottle of water and a snack. It was supposed to be a quiet, ordinary stop. But quiet moments rarely stayed that way anymore. He walked down the aisle, the rubber soles of his sneakers whispering against the linoleum. Somewhere behind him, the door chimed again. The voices came low at first, a rough chuckle, the kind that sticks under your skin. "What's this?" one of them said, his tone a mixture of mockery and disbelief. "Didn't think we'd see the likes of you around here." Michael turned slightly, catching the reflection of two men in the glass of the refrigerator door, leather jackets, faded patches, boots scuffed from the road. Their bikes were parked just outside, chrome glinting under the orange streetlight. He could smell the motor oil on their clothes even from here, mixed with cigarettes and beer. "You talking to me?" he asked quietly. "Yeah, I'm talking to you," the taller one said, stepping closer. His face was sunburned, creased at the eyes, a jagged scar cutting through his eyebrow. "You lost or something?" The second man grinned, leaning against a shelf of chips. "Ain't your kind welcome here?" he said, voice dripping with lazy venom. The words hit harder than they should have, though Michael had heard them before in different shapes, different tones. Still, every time it stung, not because he didn't expect it, but because it never got easier. He felt the heat rise in his chest, but his face stayed still. "I'm just buying some water," he said evenly. "Didn't know I needed a permission slip for that." The first man laughed, but it was an ugly laugh, dry and empty. "You don't," he said, stepping even closer, close enough that Michael could see the red veins in his eyes. "But maybe you should take the hint and get out before something happens." The sound of the fridge door closing seemed to echo too loudly. Michael's heartbeat drummed in his ears. He wanted to say something sharp, something that would shatter their arrogance, but he'd learned too well that sometimes silence was its own kind of power. Instead, he reached for his wallet. That's when one of his bodyguards, tall, quiet, built like a wall, stepped forward from the end of the aisle. He'd been there all along watching. "Is there a problem?" he said, voice low, calm. The biker stiffened, caught off guard. The shorter one sneered, but the edge of his confidence had cracked. "We're just talking," he said. "No harm done." But Michael could see the flicker of fear behind his smirk. Another of his security team came in from outside, radio in hand, eyes scanning the room. The store clerk froze behind the counter, pretending to be busy rearranging gum packets. Michael took a slow breath. "You know," he said quietly, his voice carrying a calm weight, "you don't have to like me, but you don't get to tell me where I can be." He turned to the counter, paid for his water, and walked out. The bikers didn't move. The sound of his footsteps, steady and deliberate, followed him into the night. Outside, one of his men had already called the police. The sirens came quick, too bright, too loud. The bikers tried to explain, to shrug it off as a misunderstanding, but the officers weren't listening. It ended with a warning, reports filed, the situation handled by protocol. But the tension lingered, like the taste of metal in the air. 2 days later, the memory still gnawed at him. He hadn't wanted to think about it. Another encounter, another reminder that no matter how much fame, money, or grace he carried, there were places that wanted to remind him of what he looked like before what he'd done. But he couldn't shake it. So when he found himself driving past that same store again, something in him wanted to reclaim the space. To make the act of stepping through that door mean something else. This time, he was alone. The late afternoon sun stretched long shadows across the parking lot, painting everything gold. He parked, turned off the engine, and sat for a moment, the hum of silence filling the car. His hands rested on the steering wheel. He could still hear that voice. "Ain't your kind welcome here?" He exhaled slowly, pushed the door open, and stepped out. Inside, the store was empty. The same hum of the fluorescent lights. The same faint smell of detergent and coffee. The same creak in the tile near the counter. He walked toward the back, the rhythm of his footsteps steady. The clerk behind the counter looked up and froze. Recognition, maybe guilt, flashed across his face, but he said nothing. Michael reached for a bottle of water again, the same shelf, the same brand. He smiled faintly at the repetition. Then came the sound, a metallic click behind him. It was soft, almost lost under the hum of the air conditioner, but his body recognized it instantly. The door had locked. The store suddenly felt smaller, the air heavier. He turned slowly. 6 figures emerged from the aisles, leather jackets glistening under the light, faces set, movements sharp. The leader, the same man with the scar, stepped forward, his smile a crooked, poisonous thing. "Guess you didn't learn your lesson," he said. Michael didn't move. His pulse quickened, but his mind stayed clear. He could feel the tremor of adrenaline in his hands, the tension in his shoulders. "I didn't know there was one," he said quietly. "You want to teach it?" The man's smile widened. "Maybe we will." One of them grabbed a bottle from a shelf, smashing it against the edge. Glass scattered across the floor, glinting like broken light. The sound echoed in Michael's ears. The world narrowed. 6 men, one aisle, the sharp tang of alcohol and dust in the air. He remembered the rhythm of the gym, the thud of the bag, the way breath synced with movement. He'd trained for years to master control, of body, of mind, of fear. And now it was control that would save him. The first one lunged. Michael sidestepped, his left hand catching the man's arm, pivoting, driving his elbow into his chest. The sound was dull, a single, heavy impact. The man collapsed, air wheezing out of his lungs. The others hesitated. He turned toward them, his breathing steady, the calm before the next storm. "You sure about this?" he asked. His voice was quiet, but the authority in it cut through the noise. They wavered. Fear flickered across their faces, that split second where instinct outweighed anger. Then, one by one, they backed off. The scarred man cursed under his breath, grabbing his fallen friend. "You're gonna regret this," he spat, but his voice had lost its edge. They ran. The sound of the door unlocking echoed through the silence as they fled. Michael stood there, chest rising and falling, the tension in his muscles finally loosening. He could hear his own heartbeat slowing down, the faint hum of the fridge filling the space again. He picked up the water bottle from the floor, brushed off the dust, and set it on the counter. The clerk's hands trembled as he rang it up. Neither spoke. Outside, the evening air was cool, carrying the scent of rain. He stepped into it slowly, looking out toward the horizon where the sun had dipped low, leaving streaks of red and orange across the sky. 2 hours later, the police found the bikers. The report was clean, the story short. Assault attempt, suspects detained, fined, placed under surveillance. But that wasn't what stayed with him. What stayed was the silence after they ran, the way fear had shifted from him to them. The quiet realization that dignity wasn't given, it was reclaimed. That night, sitting by his window, city lights flickering in the distance, Michael thought about how it always started the same way, a word, a glance, a test. And how every time, it wasn't about proving anything to anyone else. It was about proving to himself that he still stood tall, unbroken. The world didn't change in a single act, but sometimes it took one act to change how the world looked at you, or how you looked back at it. Under the gray morning light, the city seemed quieter than usual, but Michael felt the storm inside him building with each passing hour. 2 days had passed since the incident, yet the memory of that store, those words, that smirk, clung to his mind like a bruise that refused to fade. The world outside looked calm. Joggers moving along the sidewalk, a mother pushing a stroller, a vendor shouting about fresh oranges. But his thoughts were miles away, circling the same moment when two men decided to remind him that his skin still drew borders in places he thought he had already crossed. The police had done their part. Reports filed, warnings issued, the bikers told to stay clear. His team had assured him it was over. But inside, he knew it wasn't. Some things didn't end with paperwork. They festered. They waited. He could feel it in his bones that this wasn't the last of it. The next few days were filled with distractions. Meetings, training sessions, calls from producers, flashes of cameras, questions about upcoming projects. He smiled when he had to, laughed when expected, but something behind his eyes stayed distant. In the mirror, under the bright dressing room light, he studied his reflection, the same face that the world admired on screen, but behind it, the tension in his jaw, the faint lines of exhaustion around his eyes. He'd built his career on control, on precision, in performance, in movement, in emotion. Yet now, that same control felt like a cage. He thought back to the store, the cold stare of the bikers, the sound of their boots scraping against the tile, the way the clerk had pretended not to hear. The memory was sharp, replaying in loops. Sometimes he wondered if silence was the price of peace. But peace built on silence wasn't peace, it was surrender. That thought burned in him until he couldn't ignore it anymore. On the third morning, when he found himself driving past that same stretch of highway, he didn't plan to stop. But fate rarely asked for permission. The store stood there, small, worn, the paint peeling near the roof, a single neon open, sign flickering in the window. It looked harmless, ordinary, yet his pulse quickened. Maybe he wanted closure. Maybe he wanted to prove something, to himself, not to them. The parking lot was empty except for his black SUV. He stepped out, hands in his jacket pockets, the cool air brushing against his skin. The door chimed softly as he walked in. The same hum of fluorescent lights, the same faint smell of detergent and coffee. The same clerk behind the counter, his expression tightening when he saw who entered. Michael gave a polite nod. "Morning," he said, his tone calm but firm. The clerk said nothing, only adjusted the stack of newspapers on the counter. Michael walked toward the back, scanning the shelves, pretending to look for something, though every sense in him was alert. That was when he heard it, the faint metallic click of a lock. His body froze, but his face didn't change. He turned slightly, pretending to glance at the chips, and caught a shadow shifting in the reflection of the refrigerator glass. One, then two, then more. From behind the corner aisle, figures began to emerge, leather jackets, heavy boots, the gleam of metal chains. 6 of them. They moved slowly, spreading out like wolves closing a circle. At the center was the scarred man, the same one from 2 days ago. His smile was wide, but there was nothing human in it. "Well, look who came back," he said. "Didn't think you'd be stupid enough to show your face here again." Michael didn't move. "Didn't think you'd be stupid enough to make this worse for yourself," he said quietly. The man's expression hardened. "You think your fame means something here? You think those cops are gonna save you this time?" The others chuckled, low and cruel. The sound filled the air, heavy, sticky, like smoke. Michael's fingers curled slightly at his sides. He felt the weight of his breath in his chest, the slow drum of his pulse. Years of training had taught him that fights were lost not in fists, but in control. The scarred man stepped closer. "You people never learn," he said. "Always thinking you can walk anywhere." Act like you belong." The words came out like poison, the kind meant to provoke. Michael's jaw tightened, but his voice stayed calm. "You're right," he said. "I do belong. And so do you. But the difference is, I don't need to hurt anyone to prove it." The man's smile faltered for half a second, then rage replaced it. "Get him," he snapped. The first one lunged. Time slowed. Michael moved on instinct, the kind honed in sweat, blood, and repetition. A step back, a sidestep, a sharp pivot. His left hand blocked the swing, his right drove forward, a quick strike to the ribs. The air whooshed out of the man's lungs as he crumpled. The next came fast, a punch aimed high. Michael ducked, turned, and his fist met jaw. The crack echoed. 2 down. The rest froze, surprised by the precision, the power, the silence with which he moved. For a heartbeat, they hesitated. Michael's breathing stayed steady, his eyes locked on the scarred man. "You want to keep going?" he asked. His tone wasn't loud, but it carried something colder than anger, conviction. The scarred man's confidence wavered. He looked at his fallen friends, then at Michael, standing unshaken. He took a step back. "You think this is over?" he hissed. Michael took 1 step forward. "No," he said, "but it's changing." Something in his voice made the others falter. Then, just like that, the fight drained from them. They backed toward the door, muttering curses, dragging their wounded with them. The clerk stood frozen, pale, eyes wide with something between fear and shame. The lock clicked again, the door swinging open as they disappeared into the sunlight. Silence fell heavy, broken only by the hum of the fridge. Michael stood there, his breath slowing, his hands trembling slightly now that the adrenaline was fading. He looked around, at the broken bottle on the floor, at the dented shelf, at the reflection of his own face in the glass. Calm. Controlled. But something inside him shifted. The clerk finally spoke, his voice low. "I didn't know they were gonna, you did," Michael interrupted softly. "You knew the first time, too." The man lowered his eyes. "They come here all the time." "I can't, you could have called," Michael said. His tone wasn't angry, just tired. "You could have done something." The clerk didn't answer. Michael picked up the water bottle from the shelf, walked to the counter, and placed a few bills down. "You're gonna have to choose," he said, "what kind of place this is, who you serve." He turned and walked out. Outside, the world felt different. The sun had slipped lower, light cutting through the clouds, painting the asphalt in streaks of gold. He leaned against his car for a moment, breathing in the cool air. His hand still shook slightly, not from fear, but from the force of everything that had stayed unsaid. He thought about how easily things could have gone differently. A gun, a knife, one wrong move. But instead, he'd chosen restraint. Not because he was afraid, but because he understood that dignity wasn't just in standing tall. It was in knowing when not to strike harder than necessary. Later that evening, at the station, the same officer who'd handled the first report nodded grimly. "We found them," he said. "They'll be fine, kept under watch. They won't bother you again." Michael nodded. He didn't smile. "That's not the point," he said quietly. "It's not about me. It's about how easy it was for them to think they could do that." The officer looked away, shame flickering behind his eyes. "You're right," he said after a pause. "We've still got a long way to go." Michael left the station and drove home in silence. The city lights blurred past the windows, streaks of white and yellow merging into a soft haze. His mind was heavy, but beneath it all, something steadier burned, a quiet resolve. What happened wasn't just about a store or a group of bikers. It was a reflection of something bigger, older, heavier. And maybe the real fight wasn't in fists at all. It was in faces like the clerk's, in voices that stayed quiet when they should have spoken. He knew this wouldn't be the last time, but that didn't matter. What mattered was that he'd met hatred with something it didn't understand, strength without cruelty, power without violence. That night, as he stood by his window, looking out at the dark city pulsing with life, he whispered to himself, "They'll remember." Not out of fear, but out of recognition that he had faced them not as a victim, but as a man who refused to bow. And somewhere deep inside, he knew that was the first step toward real change, not just for him, but for anyone who'd ever been told they didn't belong. The city had started to feel different after the incident at the store, as if the air itself carried the echo of that night when Michael B. Jordan stood alone against 6 men who thought they could break him. 2 days had passed since the police caught the bikers, but the story was still moving like smoke through the streets of Los Angeles. People whispered it in barbershops, spoke it in gyms, and posted it online. "Did you hear what happened to those bikers? They messed with the wrong guy." The faces of the men who tried to jump him were all over the news, mugshots under headlines about assault, hate crime, and public disturbance. They looked smaller now, drained of that swagger they had in the moment they locked those doors behind him. Michael stayed quiet through all of it. He wasn't looking for attention. He didn't want to turn a violent act into some headline about a celebrity hero. He wanted peace. He wanted to remind people that no one, no matter how famous or ordinary, should be treated that way. The morning sun hit the kitchen window of his apartment as he brewed his coffee, the light slicing through the blinds in golden streaks. The fight still replayed in his mind, the way the first man lunged, the thud of his own gloves against bone, the echo of heavy boots on tile. But the part that stuck with him wasn't the fight. It was the fear he saw in their eyes when they realized he wasn't backing down. That was the moment they saw him not as a target, not as a celebrity or some headline name, but as a man who refused to break. He got a call later that day from the detective in charge of the case. "Mr. Jordan," the voice said, calm but respectful, "just wanted to update you. The men have been charged. Hate crime, attempted assault, and reckless endangerment. They'll be on probation, community service, fines. They'll be watched for a long time." Michael nodded even though the detective couldn't see him. "Thank you, officer," he said quietly. "I just hope they learned something from it." The detective hesitated, then added, "You did good, son. Not everyone could have stayed calm the way you did. You set an example." Michael smiled faintly. "I didn't do it for that. I just did what I had to." After the call, he stood by the window for a long while, sipping his coffee, looking out at the morning city. Somewhere down the block, a bus hissed to a stop, and the smell of asphalt and gasoline rose in the warm air. Life went on. People kept moving. And yet, something in him had changed, some quiet realization about strength, not the kind that comes from fists or fame, but the kind that comes from restraint, from knowing when to walk away and when to stand firm. 2 weeks later, Michael went back to the same neighborhood. Not because he wanted to relive the memory, but because he wanted to face it, end it properly. The corner store was quieter this time, the neon sign humming faintly in the dusty afternoon heat. The same clerk stood behind the counter, nervous when he saw him, like he wasn't sure if Michael would ever want to step foot there again. But Michael just smiled, a calm, easy smile that carried no anger. "Hey," he said softly. "How you been?" The clerk exhaled, shoulders dropping. "Better now, sir. Things been peaceful. We're all real sorry about what happened. None of us wanted trouble." "I know," Michael said. "It's in the past." He picked up a bottle of water, dropped a few bills on the counter. "Keep the change." As he turned to leave, he noticed something outside, a group of neighborhood kids on their bikes, watching him curiously, whispering to each other. One of them, maybe 12 years old, called out, "Hey, you're Michael B. Jordan, right? The guy who beat those bikers?" Michael chuckled softly. "Something like that." The kid grinned wide. "You're a legend, man." Michael laughed. "Nah, just did what was right." He ruffled the kid's hair as he passed. But later, walking to his car, those words stuck with him. Did what was right. That was it. That was all he wanted to stand for. Not a fighter, not a celebrity, but a man who stood his ground without losing his soul. When he reached the parking lot, a familiar voice called out. It was Detective Harris, the same cop from before. "Jordan! Glad I caught you." Michael turned, surprised. "Detective, didn't expect to see you here." The detective shrugged. "Just happened to be in the area. Figured I'd let you know, those guys, the bikers, they've been sticking to their probation. Some of them even started community programs, outreach stuff for at-risk teens. Guess you made an impression." Michael's eyebrows lifted slightly. "Really?" "Yeah," Harris said, leaning on his cruiser. "One of them told me he's done with that gang life. Said he realized what hate makes you become. So, you did more than just defend yourself, man. You changed something." Michael looked down for a moment, the sound of the city buzzing faintly around them. Engines, footsteps, distant laughter. "That's good to hear," he said finally. "That's all I could hope for." "You take care of yourself, Jordan," the detective said with a grin. "Try not to knock out any more bikers." Michael laughed. "No promises." The two men shared a handshake, firm and mutual, a gesture that carried respect instead of pity. As the detective drove off, Michael leaned against his car for a moment, looking up at the pale blue sky. The wind picked up, carrying the smell of coffee, gasoline, and sunlight. Life wasn't perfect. The world wasn't either. But this felt like balance. Later that evening, he trained at his gym, the rhythmic sound of gloves hitting the bag echoing through the room. His coach, an old friend from his early boxing days, watched quietly. "You've been different lately," the coach said. "Calmer. Sharper." "Yeah," Michael replied between punches. "Guess I learned something about fighting." "Oh, yeah? What's that?" Michael paused, catching his breath. "That it's not always about winning. Sometimes it's about knowing when to walk away." The coach nodded slowly, smiling. "That's wisdom, man. Real wisdom." Michael grinned, then threw another series of precise punches, the leather cracking against the bag like thunder. Every strike felt cleaner, freer, like he was letting go of something he'd been carrying for too long. After training, he walked outside. The sunset had painted the sky in deep orange and gold, the city lights flickering awake below. He could hear laughter from a nearby cafe, music from a passing car, the hum of people living their lives. For the first time in a while, it all felt peaceful. The next morning, he got a letter in the mail. It was from one of the bikers, the same man he'd knocked down in the store. The handwriting was rough, the paper creased, but the words were steady. "Mr. Jordan, I just wanted to say I'm sorry. I was full of anger that day. I thought hate made me strong, but you showed me what real strength looks like. I'm working now, trying to fix my life. Thank you for not hating me back." Michael sat there for a while, the letter in his hands, a quiet smile growing on his face. He didn't need revenge. He didn't need to prove anything. This was enough. Forgiveness had done what violence never could. Weeks turned into months. The story faded from the headlines, replaced by new scandals, new noise. But in that neighborhood, people still remembered. The store stayed open, peaceful. The clerk always greeted customers with a smile. The kids still rode their bikes out front, sometimes reenacting the movie moment they imagined had happened there. And Michael, he kept living, kept training, kept working, his life returning to its rhythm, strong and steady. Every time he passed that corner, he didn't feel fear or anger anymore. Just a quiet kind of gratitude. Because sometimes the worst moments reveal the best parts of who you are. One evening, he stopped by the store again, this time not for closure, not for memory, just to buy a bottle of water. The clerk smiled as he came in. "Hey, Mr. Jordan. Long time." "Yeah," Michael said. "Been keeping busy." "Glad to see you back," the clerk said. "Things ve been good here since that day." Michael nodded. "That's how it should be." He paid, took his bottle, and stepped outside. The street was quiet, bathed in the orange glow of the setting sun. He looked around. The same sidewalks, the same walls, the same city, but everything felt different. The fear, the hate, the anger, they didn't belong here anymore. He got into his car, started the engine, and as the music came on, he smiled to himself. The past was behind him. The future was open. And somewhere, in the rhythm of the city, the sound of his heartbeat matched the sound of peace. Because in the end, he hadn't just defended himself. He'd stood for something bigger, dignity, courage, humanity. And that was the real victory.